All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new season of Stand Against Racism here at YWCA Greater Green Bay. I'm really excited to have you here on Zoom and on Facebook, and then with the replay crew as well. So hello to all of you out there. I am Andrea Hugenvik. I'm from YWCA Greater Green Bay. I work in our social justice program, and I'm here today on this one. So thank you all. You probably have met me already. I've got some really exciting kind of announcements for this year. So I'm really glad that you were able to join us for this first Stand Against Racism of our season. And we have some new kind of stuff happening this year. So we have chosen this year to go to a more seasonal approach to Stand Against Racism. So if you were here last year or in previous years, each month was kind of its own separate thing. This year, we're really doing a seasonal approach. So we've got 3 months scheduled around housing here in the fall. So today's webinar, and then also in October and November, we'll be looking at housing. To go along with that, we have an after show planned. So look for our first podcast style after show to come out on Friday this week, where we have non-experts really responding and being in conversation to their experience watching this webinar and learning along with all of you out there in the universe as well. And then also a common read. So join us as we get together to read, if I can take my post-it off, Evicted is the book we're choosing to read this year by this season by Matthew Desmond. So to find both the podcast and the book read, you can find us over on Facebook and join the group within our Facebook page that's called Stand Against Racism. And the common read will be there. Also, the podcast will get posted there as well. And it's really the spot for us to have continued discussion and bring in some additional kinds of content pieces to go along with Stand Against Racism as well. If Facebook is not your jam and that's not something that works for you, we totally understand that not everybody is on Facebook and that might not work. But you still want to join a book club. We do have a kind of traditional book club at YWCA Green Bay as well. You can find out information about that one on our website as well. So if you want to do a book discussion, a book club, but you're not into the Facebook thing, pop over to our website. We'd be really happy to have you over in our more traditional one as well. So super excited about kind of new things happening. And one of the things that doing this more seasonal approach where we have 3 months to dive into a topic is that it gives us the opportunity to really bring in some different voices than maybe we've seen in the past. And today is a really great example of that. I am super, super excited to have with us 3 different YWs from across the United States to share with us their experience and expertise in housing programs and how those programs really kind of connect back to the work that we do at YW and the mission that we have. So super, super excited about this. Before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out to Schreiber, who really is the one who makes this all happen. We're really excited to offer this program for free to our community, but it does take some dollars on the back end to actually get everything together. So huge, huge shout out to Schreiber for making this happen for us. And if you feel so inclined to help join us on our mission through a financial donation, you can certainly do that on our website. So if you hop over to ywcagreenbay.org, there's a donate button right on the top. We'd really love to have you join us in that as well. So welcome to everybody again out there in the universe. It seems like people are sort of settled in now. So those are my kind of announcements for the day, and we will get popped in. So I'm really, really excited to have 4 YW staff members from across the country join us today. So let's sort of meet them. So Christy, do you want to get us started?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Sozio. I am Assistant Director of an initiative called A Place for Me. We are a collective impact initiative to end and prevent youth and young adult homelessness in Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland, Ohio is, for those who don't know. And we are hosted by YWCA Greater Cleveland and housed at YWCA Greater Cleveland.
Thanks so much for joining us today and being part of this. Kate, how about you?
Sure. I'm Kate Roberts. I'm from the YWCA of Bucks County. So we're located right outside of Philadelphia. So I am the director of housing and social services for that Y in Bucks County. And we have 4 housing programs. So we focus on rapid rehousing. We are focusing on homelessness prevention. We also have a program called Housing Planning. And then our newest initiative is called Haven House, and it is a safe house for victims fleeing human trafficking. So we're really excited about that new space that we can provide for women and their children.
And Mona and Lily?
Good morning, everybody, or I guess good afternoon to all of you in the Midwest and the East Coast. My name's Mona Sherwold. I'm the Homeless Initiatives Director for the YWCA of Seattle King and Snohomish County. My role is I oversee a number of different programs that address homelessness throughout our community, and that's everything from day centers, transitional, emergency shelters, rapid rehousing programs, and permanent supportive housing programs.
Hi, and I'm Lilly Hansel, and I'm from Seattle, Washington as well, with the YWCA homeless program that we have and located right in downtown Seattle. So I oversee the Enhanced Night program and the Rapid Rehousing program. And then we also have a hotel program that we provided safe distancing for women during COVID as well. So it's nice to meet all of you.
Christy, Kate, Mona, and Lily, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate you. And for me personally, this is a sort of great moment to remember that we do have more than 200 local associations across the country who are all on this mission together to eliminate racism and empower women, and really a movement that we create together. So it's really fun to be part of something so much bigger than us individually, and to be reminded of that every once in a while. So I super appreciate you being here today. So we're going to dive into some questions. One kind of tiny little logistical piece. If you have questions throughout the course of the webinar, if you pop them into the Q&A section in Zoom, or if you pop them into the comment section on Facebook, I'll be watching both of those. I've got you up in Inception mode here on my phone. So if you do have questions, for those of you out there in the universe watching, please do let us know, and we'll try and get them kind of popped in as well. So the first thing we're really going to dive into is looking at the kinds of forces and factors that really create and maintain. Actually, let's back up just a second. I didn't tell you all this. Can we just kind of level set for a second about what is housing insecurity and homelessness? What are the differences there? And what is it that we're really talking about when we say those things?
I guess I can jump in. So yeah, that's an important conversation to level set. And one thing for anyone who works in homeless services knows is the definition varies based on the setting and really matters. So I can speak for us, and then partners can speak for themselves, but we use a really broad definition of homelessness and housing instability, just meaning you don't have a stable place to stay. It could be that you're staying with someone temporarily. It could be that you're having to exchange sacks or something else for a place to stay, or for access to food, things like that. It could be staying in a homeless shelter. It could be staying in what we call a place not meant for human habitations, like an abandoned building, a car, a bus stop. So it really means a lot of different things. And it could mean that you're staying with someone and you're okay for a little while there, but you just never know when they might say it's time for you to go. And you're kind of walking on eggshells or doing what you can to contribute, but not sure. And so, of course, that really results in a lot of instability and fear, and just a hard time kind of doing everything that you want to do and need to do.
Yeah. And when we look at, we have different programs, like I'll use rapid rehousing and housing planning. They both have they fall into a different category of kind of, rapid rehousing is literally homeless. So you're either, like Chrissy said, staying at a shelter, living on the streets, staying somewhere that's unsanitary. And then when we look at housing planning, we kind of look at that imminent risk of becoming homeless. So if they're couch surfing, if they're in a house that's kind of overcrowded, that's kind of where we would look at, the housing insecurity and how to get them into, permanent housing that's safe for that household.
I mean, I would say that it's similar to what everybody has said. I think that we cover the gamut here at the YWCA. We do a lot from street outreach, that very first step. We have in Seattle, we have tons and tons of encampments. We have tons of people living in their cars and living in their RVs. So we been actively, Lilly's program here, we actively work with outreach programs and the hospitals as they are initially exiting women out of places so we can bring them in. So that's sort of our very first step of just developing that relationship that ultimately then we can get them permanently housed. And then the back end, right, is really trying to provide that housing stability. We currently are giving out some of those COVID funds from the CARES Act from Washington, D.C. of the eviction prevention. And so really trying to help prevent women and men and families to stabilize them so that they don't end back up in that situation. And that many times looks at what are the kinds of supports that are needed. Housing is just one thing, right? But housing is not the catch-all. It's sort of like what keeps people housed. Yes, income is one thing, but also what are the other kind of supports and resources that are needed? I would say when we work with our chronic homeless, they don't have a lot of safety net, right? They don't have sometimes the social skills to develop community and support. And we're finding in some of our long-term programs, and I know Lilly can speak to this, we have women that have been in our women's day center nighttime program here for years and years and years because we have become their permanent housing. So it's kind of looking at what are those kind of gaps that kind of keep people housed besides just the financial, just the resource piece. And I think sometimes we overlook that piece and how important it is. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say too, for the women that we've placed in housing that have been chronically homeless, really providing the support, not like Mona was saying, not just placing them in housing, really actively being an advocate for them, checking in with them, seeing if they need resources, making sure that they're attending their medical appointments and mental health. One of the biggest things that we've seen in the past year and a half is mental health. And within the homeless women in the shelter, it's really declined. And because they aren't able to connect with their mental health providers, a lot of times the connection for internet isn't there. They don't have phones if it's on Zoom. So we've seen a really big decline. So when we are placing women into housing, which we have, I think we've housed about 78 folks this year so far, that we really want to make that connection and make sure that they're connected in like wraparound services, because that's the key to keep them in housing, as what we've been seeing.
If I could just add one more thing too. This isn't directly to your question, Andrea, but a question in the chat just kind of about experience with homelessness. And I realized I didn't really explain what we do at A Place for Me at YWCA Greater Cleveland. So we really do our work in three ways. One is systems change, looking at the youth homelessness system and figuring out what's working, what's not working. Anywhere from like what definition of homelessness can we use to that question for what resource to like really what do we need to fundamentally change. The second way we really do our work is partnership with young people who have lived experience of homelessness. And we work primarily with 18 to 24-year-olds. Some of our programs go 14 to 26. And so we really know that young people with lived experience are the experts in what needs to change and what needs to be done differently. So we have a youth board, young people who are paid for their time who work with us, as well as 2 young adults with lived experience on our staff that really work with us every step of the way. And then the third piece of how we do our work is direct service to young people, which was never our intention. But you start to get calls like, hey, you're a place for me. And what you don't say is like, sorry, we only do systems change. Good luck. So we started really working with young people, helping them to navigate the resources. And through all that work, we realized the other thing that we need to do is to do our work with a racial equity lens. And so trying to take that and apply that to every piece of work that we do.
Thank you for that. So let's move in just a second to the kind of first question. What are really those kind of pieces of our society that create and maintain housing insecurity and homelessness? Why is this a problem?
I would say, I mean, the biggest one is lack of affordable housing. People can't, don't make a livable wage to be able to maintain permanent housing while paying for all of their other bills. And that kind of creates people to fall into homelessness, especially if they get, if they're down on their luck and they're unemployed, or they get a big medical bill, childcare, any of these big expenses. The lack of, I know around us a 1-bedroom goes anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, but our minimum wage here is $7.75. You can't live on that.
I can jump in then next too. So yeah, totally agree with that. And the other thing that we really see and like to just call out as a major factor contributing to homelessness is racism and the history of racism in our country. If anyone is familiar with the Spark report, or if not, if anyone's interested, I can drop that link in the chat. But it stands for Supporting Partnerships for Anti-Racist Communities. It was a really seminal research report out of C4 Innovations. And if I can, oh, I can't share my screen. That's okay. But that study really looked at, I think conventionally we've had this narrative of people experience homelessness or housing instability because of poverty, and they just don't have the money to afford housing, or they're not able to meet their needs. And what this report really showed is that you cannot actually explain homelessness because of poverty. And for example, they went through general populations. And looks like I'm just going to show one quick graphic to just kind of help for those who are visual. So this first column here is the general population, and this is directly in the Spark report. Hopefully I didn't freeze too much there. Okay. The next column is those in deep poverty, and the next column is those experiencing homelessness. And this reddish line here is Black people. And so Black people make up here about looks like 18% of the general population, a little under 35% of those experiencing deep poverty, and yet almost 65% of those experiencing homelessness. And so if it were just poverty, you'd kind of just expect to see a straight line here. And for white people, it's basically exactly the opposite. And if you look down here, these 2 lines at the bottom are for American Indian and Alaska Native, and then it almost exactly overlaps with Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. And while it looks like a really small increase, if you actually think about the ratios of 0.3% of the general population, 0.6% in deep poverty, and then 1% experiencing homelessness, that's actually a huge disparity there too. And then I just want to note before I stop sharing this slide that for the Hispanic or Latinx population, identified here as both of any race, we don't see that same pattern. But what the report really goes through is that they think there's more to it. We know that Hispanic and Latinx folks do experience homelessness, and just maybe they're not showing up in the formal system, or perhaps it's data reporting and stuff. So really, an area to dive more into. And just one example of how we see this play out. So if we think about, and we just to note too, we definitely see this in our community. For young adults experiencing homelessness in Cuyahoga County, our biggest disparities with Black young adults. Black folks are 30% of the general population, 52% of those experiencing poverty, and then over 75% of young adults experiencing homelessness. And we think about, all the systems of racism that have happened over the history of our country over 400 years, and many of them have not been undone. And so one that we looked at is redlining, and how communities that had most people of color were just straight up disinvested in. Disclaimer, I'm not an expert, but that's basically the gist, is that these communities were deemed not worthy, deemed not having investments. Those policies have not been undone. And so we did some data diving of all the young people experiencing homelessness, looked at those who were getting the resource of rapid rehousing rental assistance or scattered site permanent vouchers, where they could really just go into the community. They had to find a landlord, but they could live, wherever they could find housing. And we kind of heard from young people a lot that they wanted to live in other neighborhoods, but the rents there were not affordable, or landlords weren't willing to rent to young adults. Age is not a protected class in most of our communities. And in our county, source of income is not currently protected either. So landlords can also say, no, we won't take anyone who's getting help. And so they just couldn't rent in these areas. And so we were curious about how that played out. And so we mapped out where young people were able to live. And lo and behold, it mapped exactly onto that historically redlined community. And so we really believe that we have to call that out as a contributing factor to homelessness and really work to undo those factors in our work.
I just want to say that I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's absolutely correct. Some of the work we've been doing in Seattle has been around those same issues as well, including doing education around the many landlords that we work with. And we actually had a group, not from the Y directly, that actually went out. 2 applications, right? One was white, one was Black. Who got the housing? Exactly looked the same. Income was the same. That was done over and over repeatedly. And race was the factor of why they did not get in. So we too have done a lot of work around that. Lilly, intentionally, we hired a Black woman case manager to specifically focus on our women of color. Here at the YWCA, along with the big YWCA logo, we are also tasked with really putting the Black woman in the center of our work, because she's the farthest away of opportunity. So if we can really help our Black women, we're lifting everybody up with who we serve. And so I just would add sexism is another big factor. So you add that on people of color, but you add on women of color and women who still make less money than men, who still are many times tasked with being alone, raising the children, and are many times the ones that are deeply in poverty and have a lack of opportunity, a lack of education, things to kind of rise them up and bring them up. So, and then there's all the other isms as well, right? I mean, we could go on and on, dealing with our criminal justice system, dealing with our housing system per se, and how even we do housing in this country, our mental health system, all the systems that really are not working well for many, many of the people we see and people of color.
So speaking of those social disparities, and Christy, thanks so much for putting that graph up to really help us see that piece of, we really are seeing these significant disparities in the way that people are experiencing homelessness, or the rates at which people are experiencing homelessness. What are some of those social factors that are really creating those disparities? And we've touched on this a little bit. Christy, you talked about historic redlining and how that sort of looks. Mona, you talked about sexism and the way that we have gender differences within our society. What are some of those other ways and those really kind of direct ways that those social disparities are showing up, and what's really causing those social disparities in the way that we see homelessness and housing insecurity play out in our country?
I mean, I think when you're also looking at, social disparities and, you also have to look at like incarceration, people that are people of color in poverty neighborhoods are more likely to be targeted for petty crimes. Whereas in white neighborhoods or, richer neighborhoods, that wouldn't always be the case. And then when you get into, the criminal record, that kind of falls into that is kind of with landlords that they're not being able to have as many housing options once they have a criminal record, which also goes into makes it difficult for them to get employment. So that all kind of ties into, people of color are more likely to have a criminal record and be targeted because of that.
I really appreciate you bringing that one up. And somebody did ask, so I'll say it out loud. We're going to focus on criminal justice and incarceration in our winter season. So once we get through housing, we'll get into that and spend 3 months there. But really this piece of like, it's such a like spiral and a like self-reinforcing of one another, right? That criminal record means you have fewer choices for where you get to live. Where you get to live means you have more surveillance and you're more targeted for kind of petty stuff, which means you're more likely to be incarcerated, which means you have fewer options for where you live. And it just kind of keeps like building on top of each other into a giant mess.
Yes.
Yeah, Lily was just mentioning to me that in Seattle, the laws were changed that you can't really look at criminal record for history because of that. So I think there's been some good work around some of that system movement, around the criminal justice piece. Obviously, some severe crimes or high-level sex offenders, they still can be screened so that people can be safe. I was also thinking about where people who have limited opportunity, where they get housed, there's a lack of just resources, period, right? We talk about there's not a grocery store. What about public transportation? That's another disparity. What about healthcare and school systems? And many times, many people kind of, when you buy a house or whatever, you look at school systems, you look at places that are going to be the best for your children. You look at grocery stores, you look at shopping. And we kind of have these dead zone areas in our communities of where we place people. And I think sometimes even nonprofits do that, right? We build our nonprofit housing sometimes in what we call those deserts, those food deserts, those deserts where there aren't the resources, because that's where we can get land that's cheaper to build. And then we don't build the things around it. And so we've been really working hard here too to really have housing in mixed neighborhoods, mixed income neighborhoods, because there's more opportunities for the people we serve. There's more opportunities for people to get to know each other, because we have in downtown Seattle, the housing is either for very, very low income people or very wealthy people. Well, guess what? Those groups of people don't mix too often, do they? So you kind of find these communities of these extremes and none of the in between, which is kind of the leveler of really kind of to learn and to get involved with each other and get to know each other as community. Because I think that's how we get rid of some of those disparities. I think a lot of people don't, and growing up in communities where there aren't many people of color that are in your community, sometimes it's hard to believe there's really those issues going on, right? It's really hard to believe there's really racism in our country in 2021. But when you're doing the actual work, that's where that education comes in around how this is real and this is really happening in our communities. There's a lot of disparities around what you were mentioning, but
yeah.
I've been thinking, sorry, Kirsty, I've been thinking a lot about the transportation piece in this last year. And something that really sparked it for me was CDC guidelines about grocery shopping less often. And then thinking about how hard it would be for me to get from this chair to a grocery store with public transportation just anytime, but then to try and get 2 weeks worth of groceries onto a bus. And it would be, so from where I am, it would take about 45 minutes to get to the grocery store on public transportation. You all know I eat ice cream every single day. I live in Wisconsin, like your girl needs her dairy.
Yeah.
How do you make that happen? With public transportation then, like that transportation piece is really a pretty significant sort of
Yeah.
reinforcement again in this system.
Yeah.
So I would encourage all of you out there in the universe to think about and like pull up your public bus schedule and think about how long it would take you to get to a doctor's appointment or the grocery store or any of those kinds of places on public transportation from where you are. And if that's something that's really something that's going to be fun for you to do, or if it's going to be really pretty miserable to try and get around on public transportation from where you're at. So it was an eye-opening experience for me, that's for sure.
And I'll just kind of agree and to the question of what are some of the factors. I really think like pick an area and you can really show how it contributes to disparities and housing and homelessness. And so one thing that I think is helpful when we think about all these things is you hear a lot about equity versus equality. And so just, working definitions, hang on, for me, for this conversation, we have automatic lights and that's going to happen every few minutes, apparently. So for the purpose of this conversation and kind of the definitions I like to use, it's just equal means everyone gets the same thing, or equality means everyone gets the same thing, and equity means everyone gets what they need. And so if you think about the history of our country and just kind of back to the point I made earlier about how so many things like redlining have not been undone, we know that families of color have not been able to accrue wealth in the same way that white families have. And so you see that in basically every area when it comes to housing and homelessness. Another really important thing that's mentioned in the Spark report, and if you haven't gotten it by now, I'm a total groupie of the Spark report. But they talk about this thing that they coined network impoverishment, which means that folks experiencing homelessness, it doesn't mean that they don't have people that care about them or want them to be housed, but often because of this lack of ability to accrue wealth over generations, because of all the intentional policies that we've put in place, these folks are just doing their best to make it. And so that just extra burden of taking someone else into the home can put someone on edge. And so, just the electric bill going up or the water bill going up, or folks can just be in really precarious situations. And so that's kind of one thing. And then another thing is when we think about then when someone is interacting with folks working with those experiencing homelessness or preventing homelessness, a lot of the ways our policies and programs are set up is to just give everyone the same thing. Okay, you're experiencing literal homelessness, you get rapid rehousing, and you get X number of months to find it to get a place. You get this much time in rental assistance, and at the end, it's on you. And what we're trying to think through is how could we do that differently with an equity lens? So locally, we just extended it so that everyone gets 12 months of rental assistance, which is great. And we're hoping that that will help with, recruitment of landlords and those things. I know other communities, some have had 12 months for a long time. And especially for the population I work with, young adults, you're really still figuring things out when you're a young adult. And if you don't have that family support to fall back on, when you make a mistake, which is totally normal and how you learn, then you really need that time to make mistakes, build up savings, figure out what you want to do with your life, all those things. And so we're trying to think about how can we apply equity to this. So even something like the time to find an apartment or to find a job, like Mona and Lily said earlier, it takes longer if you have a Black sounding name or you mark Black on an application. There's been studies that show that. And so if we know it's going to take Black folks longer to find a job and longer to find an apartment, can we build something differently into those policies so that they get what they need as they're working on getting this rental assistance? And we don't have the answers, but we're just trying to figure it out because it is all the other thing I think that's just important to acknowledge when we talk about this work is it's complicated and it's interconnected, and it is a legacy of hundreds of years that we're trying to grapple with and also meet people's needs in the immediate. And so to just kind of we try to take an approach of testing things out where we can and then seeing what works and what doesn't.
Any other thoughts here before we move on? So then the next question, and this came up in the Q&A, so thank you for that, is about those barriers to maintaining housing stability and wraparound services. What are those kinds of barriers that we have, and what are the things that we can provide to people? Some people, maybe not everybody needs them, that can help in helping people to move into stable housing situations.
So I know in, our programs here that we do really work individual, because each woman that comes in the space has a different situation. So really assessing what their need is and how we can, assist them. And we try to do a stability plan with each woman to see how we can best serve them. And I know that it's been really helpful for the programs to be able to assess, what the need is and really work towards with the women with that plan. With our program too, we do like a race and social justice plan for each of our programs. So I know for the last couple of years, our main focus have been really having African American women, if they might have some barriers to past arrears or different things, of making sure those needs are met before we get them into housing. And that was our main focus of really helping African American women or reuniting them with their children as well. So really just looking and assessing the needs of each individual, because I really feel like everyone's different and how we can best serve them.
And I would just add, echoing what Christy was just talking about, I think most of us get funded by government entities, right? And some private entities. But I think to really push the factor of equity and really to push being able to create programs on the back end that create housing stability based on what Lily was saying, the individual person, and not a automatic cutoff time. And too many times our funders want to see people house. Quick, get them house, right? But there isn't a lot in the back end of helping to keep them housed and helping them to develop the skills to stay housed. Maybe 6 months, maybe 3 months at the most. Sometimes there's some of the programs now requiring a year. So I think to be able to push our funders around being able to have that flexibility. We have a veteran program for homeless veterans, rapid rehousing. And one of the things is we have a time limit. We can only serve them for 2 years. So the staff feel pressure that once they get a veteran house, they have to quick exit them just in case they struggle and we have to bring them in. And we still have time on the clock that we can still serve them. That doesn't always work. So I think to really be able to individually look at each person, but really to help our funders to understand that piece of it. And it doesn't mean everybody's going to need our support and help. Some people will do great, get a great job, and they're back on their feet.
Yeah, definitely. And then when you look at, when we are dealing with our homeless population and rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing does follow a housing first approach. So we are trying to eliminate all of the barriers of several other programs that might be. And when we bring them in, we kind of plan backwards. So, the goal is to get them in permanent housing, kind of really not look at the barriers, but kind of once we obtain housing and get them in there, how can we keep them in permanent housing, whether if they're, actively using, how can, we get them in treatment or, AA or NA programs, or if they don't have income, there's really no requirements for our rapid rehousing program. So they can come in without income, they can come in without a criminal background. And then we would work with them in our program. But like Mona said, we are kind of time limited with that 2-year period. So it does get kind of sticky when there's so much to work on and it feels like so little time. And then, with the housing market being, prices being so high, and minimum wage being so low, it's hard to get them to that stability point before we exit them. And we're trying to, get them there so they don't re-enter our system and become chronically homeless.
Kate, you mentioned housing first. Can you talk a little bit about what that concept is?
Sure. So housing first is pretty much, we want to house them first and then work on all of the barriers after. So whether that be, employment, whether that be, like I said, substance abuse, whether that be, maybe helping them with their credit scores, all of that. Our main focus in the beginning would be permanent housing, and then the case manager will work with them, do a needs assessment on all of the other areas that needs to be worked on.
Yeah, so to be clear for kind of those of you out there in the universe, oftentimes housing programs require certain things, like abstaining from illegal drug use or abuse as part of that. To be able to be eligible for a program, you can't have a substance use or an active substance use disorder. Whereas Housing First is really about just get them into housing. We can figure the rest of the stuff out, but let's get them into housing. And the idea there is that it's actually really hard to get through a lot of those barriers when you don't have a place to live. Right?
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on all of that, something we hear from young people all the time is, there's all these expectations and all this pressure, and yet when you've been experiencing homelessness or housing instability or couch surfing or whatever, you are stressed out and you are on all the time. You feel like you can't really rest or breathe. And so you get your own place, and rather than having a minute, it's like, okay, now I got to fill it with what I need. Now I got to get a job. Now I got to do this. I got to check this off and rush into a minimum wage job so I can check and say I got a job. And that's not really helping people to move on the path to sustainability of their own and to meet their own goals that they want to achieve. And everyone's different, so everyone's going to be on a different path. But to really try to have time for just that person to rest, relax, have respite, get whatever wellness services they may want or need, have space to address physical health, mental health, could be education, whatever that person needs, but to be able to figure that out. And then just one other thing is kind of that lack of a safety net that we see a lot too. And just another, I don't know, my brain works with examples, so I'm just going to keep giving examples. So another one is we looked at our data of young people who had exited the homeless system and then were coming back. And we had even greater racial disparities in that group than we did of those experiencing homelessness at the front door. So we're like, something's going on, we got to do it. And we looked into the reasons. And the top few reasons people were returning is one, incarceration, which goes to the points that were made earlier. But the biggest one was that they just lost their job and they didn't have the safety net. They didn't have savings. They didn't have someone they could ask for help. I know for me, like, if something happened, I would have family who I could fall back on. And there are many historical reasons that I have that and other folks don't. And so we tried to address it. Just one small thing that we're trying to do as we work on the bigger systems is we created a process where we just give young adults like a little magnet that they can keep. And, we think about it a lot, like, is a magnet not cool? Maybe we should give them something else. What are young people like these days? But it just has three people's contact information so that, if there's like three different organizations that way they can maybe say, oh, I knew this person, I'm going to call them, or like, I'm calling all three because I need help. But it's just like, did you have rapid rehousing? Do you need some help with rent? Give us a call. We'd much rather help you out with a couple months of rent than have you need to return to homelessness. That is not a natural consequence of losing a job. And so just kind of thinking about like those barriers that really should not cause people to have to not have.
And I just want to add another piece I think that's really important. And I've especially seen that with homeless women, but this isn't homeless is also your social network. When you are really working with encampments or a group of car parkers or even Angeline's Day Center where women are here 24 hours together, that is their community. And when you place them in housing, they've lost their community. And many times, right, we see them bringing in all their friends. We have to have that conversation. You can't have 25 people living with you, or these are my friends. These are my buddies that were in the tent encampments with me. And they don't quite understand why not. This is my home now. And I share my home with my friends. And so I think it's really trying to understand that piece as well and helping them to really develop that social network that is so, so important. And this is what many times our homeless communities and our homeless programs actually offer. I think many times people say, how can people live in these encampments? They're horrible. There's garbage, but they have a sense of community and belonging. And many times we put people in these isolated apartments and they don't feel that anymore. I also think a piece is we really need to and we do talk to the people that we serve as well, developing different types of housing models. Not everybody wants to live in their own one-bedroom apartment. That's a very middle class, pretty much a middle class view. And to really design models that work for people and how people want to live.
And also a really white people view of what housing looks like. That's something that we talk about a lot here at YW Green Bay is how so many of our social structures really match up with those dominant culture groups, which would be white people and middle class people. And to have people who have different cultural ideas about community and living together and intergenerational housing and having lots of people together, whereas white people really do think about, I need my own bathroom and I don't want to share it with anyone. And like we make movies making fun of people who are, failure to launch, people who want to stay living with their parents for an extended period of time. Whereas in other cultures, that's like totally super normal to do that. So it's a super interesting sort of piece of this. Curious here in the question and answer about siblings wanting to live together. Do we see siblings in homelessness particularly? And if there are housing models out there that really look at more group placements and group living kinds of accommodations, do those exist?
Well, I'll just start with it's really interesting. So when we started out, one of the first things we were thinking is like shared housing. It's developmentally appropriate for young adults to have a roommate. And so kind of some of these things that we're talking about. And what we've really heard loud and clear from young adults is no, thank you. We are not interested in that. And so one that's really important for us to find out and listen to, but it's also just kind of goes to show. And so even when in our case, when we've had siblings or family groups, it's been pretty mixed about whether or not folks do want to live together or do want to have their own. And I think it's interesting to think about that. Yes, absolutely. Our programs and just everything is really normed on white cultures. And yet at the same time, many of the reasons that other cultures, non-white folks, had to live together is because they couldn't afford, because of systemic racism, to have their own places. And so it's also, is that actually the want or not? And I think that's going to be different for everyone to figure out. So you know, we tried to be creative in terms of being able to, if families want to be housed together, even if the child, quote, is an adult, to figure that out with the programs, and it's able to be done. But just wanted to share that, you know, we also learned, like, a lot of times people are like, no, I want that independence. Like, I want my own space. I want to be myself and be able to see my family when I want to and be on my own when I want to. So just our community, every community is different, but that's been our experience.
And I think that's true. I think that's true. I mean, for a lot of people, or people say they want that. And once again, I think that's where it's important to have different housing models. I think a lot of people want their own bathroom because they've shared for a long time in the homeless community and the shelters. But there's ways you can develop housing models where you have your own room and your own bathroom, but maybe there's other things you share and you're part of a community to sort of support each other. So I think there are some models that have been developed in our across the country around how can you have community, but also keep some of those private spaces private that sometimes cause problems or that people really feel are important. Yeah.
So we have just a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to put you all on the spot and ask you if there is one thing that you want sort of regular non-housing staff people to know about housing insecurity or homelessness or the people that you serve, what is that thing that you want our viewers to know?
I'm like, I know. That majority of the households that we serve are just average people. They're not, you know, they might have some criminal backgrounds, but it's not, majority of our households, you know, don't, they're not all actively using, they're not all criminals. You know, they're just your, families that, you know, got down on their luck. Majority of our households that we serve are women and children fleeing domestic violence. So, you know, it's situational homelessness, which, you know, also comes with this stigma. So that would kind of be my takeaway to all of you, that, you know, they are average people. If you do see them on the street, just give them a smile, ask them how they're doing. You know, we see it often here, especially since we're, you know, so close to Philadelphia, that our homeless population is seen. That majority of them say that, like, nobody asks how we're doing, nobody smiles at us, they kind of turn their head and don't look at us. So just give them a smile and keep walking, and you never know, that could brighten their day.
I would really like to say that I really feel like listening to the voices of folks that are homeless. It's just the act of listening. It makes such a big difference. And I've just heard so many women over and over just say that just the hope that we've given them, and by listening to what their needs are, has really taken them, you know, a long ways with that. And also to what Caitlin said, is really acknowledging folks that, you know, like just today there was a woman outside that, you know, was looking for food, and we were able to give her food, but acknowledging that if there's something that you can do and to actively, you know, act on it, you know, just by handing some food out or a conversation makes a big difference. And I feel like Caitlin said, is being acknowledged that they're humans too, and they just really, you know, want to be a part of the society as well. So just really acknowledging them.
And I would just add that for the non-housing folks, you just never know who the people are that you are helping or the people that we're housing. Listen to their stories. Many of the people who we find in our streets have magnificent backgrounds, right? Magnificent stories, the stories they can tell. the things they have done in their life. You just never know until you walk in their shoes. And then you add the additional race and sex and the trauma that people have experienced, and how housing makes such a big difference in people's lives, and that we all can do our part.
Yeah, and I'll just add, absolutely. The young people who we work with just are incredible, wonderful. They bring me so much joy. Some of the best people I've ever been able to meet and work alongside with, since they work as leaders with us too. But the other thing I would say to folks is to do your own work. A big piece of this work is for us all to learn about the history of our countries that we're maybe not taught in school. Evicted is a great book to read. Or the Spark report that I put in the chat, or just whatever it is for you to increase your own learning, because, we talk about these 400 years and the big systems and the things that we're up against, and it's really going to take us all learning and growing together to make those changes so that we can really prevent folks from needing to be in this situation at all.
So thank you, Christy, Kate, Mona, Lily, thank you so much for being with us today to help our community understand better kind of the nuances and the underlying pieces and the kinds of complexities of housing insecurity and homelessness that many of us have just never had to We've just never had to think about it before. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate you. All of you out there in the universe watching, thank you so much for joining us today and joining us on this YW mission from all of our sister organizations to eliminate racism and empower women. I did drop the link in both the Zoom chat and also on the Facebook live video for our Stand Against Racism group. So Facebook is your thing. We encourage you to really join us over there in that group as we read Evicted together and have some more conversation there. And then also just continue having some conversation about what we're learning and how we're getting through this and how we can keep sort of moving forward, even those of us who are not kind of more immediate people that work in this space. So thank you all so much. Again, huge shout out to Schreiber. Thank you for sponsoring Schreiber. And you, those of you who are watching, certainly if you'd like to give us a little bit to help us in this mission, feel free to do that over on our website at ywcagreenbay.org. And again, thank you so much to everybody. Have a really fantastic rest of your day. And we wish you all of the best. So bye, everybody.